She banked her small Cessna through the morning clouds at 8,000 feet. Just another weekend pilot heading home from a charity flight, when 4 F-35 Lightning jets materialized around her like steel vultures. The lead pilot's voice crackled through. Emergency frequencies, demanding immediate compliance and treating her single-engine aircraft like a terrorist threat. But when the tower heard her respond with 2 words that hadn't been spoken in classified airspace for over a decade, everything changed. Want to know what silent storm meant and why those fighter jets suddenly backed off like they'd just threatened a ghost? Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The Pacific Northwest stretched endlessly below Captain Elena Vasquez as she guided her 1978 Cessna 172 through scattered cumulus clouds. The morning sun painted the Olympic Mountains in shades of gold and purple, and Puget Sound gleamed like hammered silver between the islands. At 47, Elena had the kind of weathered beauty that came from years of squinting into bright skies and facing down challenges that would break most people. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her civilian clothes, jeans, a faded University of Washington sweatshirt, and worn leather boots gave no hint of the uniform she'd once worn with distinction. The Cessna's engine hummed with the reliable rhythm of a machine that had been meticulously maintained despite its age. Elena's hands rested lightly on the yoke, her touch as confident as a concert pianist's on familiar keys. This was her sanctuary now, this small cockpit where the only voices were from air traffic control, and the only missions involved flying rescue dogs to new homes or delivering medical supplies to remote clinics. It was honest work, meaningful work, and it helped her sleep better than the pills the VA doctors kept prescribing. She'd left Boeing Field in Seattle 2 hours earlier, carrying 3 golden retriever puppies to an animal rescue in Bellingham. The dogs had settled into their travel crates after the initial excitement, and now they dozed peacefully in the passenger compartment. Elena smiled at their soft snoring, remembering how she used to fly with much different cargo and aircraft. That cost more than most people's houses. But those days felt like another lifetime, another person's memories wrapped in classification, levels that still made her careful about what stories she told at the local diner. The radio crackled with routine chatter from Seattle Center, a United flight checking in at flight level 350, a cargo plane requesting vectors around weather, a student pilot practicing instrument approaches at a small airport near Olympia. Elena monitored the frequencies with half her attention while watching the fuel gauges and oil pressure with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned that small problems became big problems quickly when you were alone in the sky. Her flight plan was simple and legal, filed properly with all the right codes and altitudes. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. The charity flight had been her idea, something to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied during the long weekends when the silence got too loud. 3 years ago, when she'd finally hung up her flight suit for the last time, Elena had promised herself she'd find ways to serve that didn't involve classified briefings or missions that officially never happened. Flying rescue animals wasn't exactly the same as the operations she'd once commanded, but it filled a need in the community and gave her a reason to keep her pilot's license current. She'd purchased the Cessna with her separation pay, choosing the 1978 model because it reminded her of the first plane she'd ever flown solo during her college ROTC program. Simple instruments, forgiving flight characteristics, and the kind of honest engineering that didn't depend on computer systems or satellite links. After spending years in aircraft that could break the sound barrier and disappear from radar at will, there was something deeply satisfying about flying a machine where every system was visible and mechanical, where skill mattered more than technology. The morning flight had gone perfectly. The rescue coordinator in Bellingham had been waiting with coffee and homemade cookies. grateful for Elena's willingness to make the trip without charging for fuel costs. The puppies had been healthy and energetic, their new foster families already lined up and excited. It was the kind of mission that reminded Elena why she'd started flying in the first place, back when she'd been a young woman with dreams of adventure and service that extended far beyond the small farming town where she'd grown up. Now she was heading home to her cabin on Whidbey Island, where she'd spend the afternoon working in her garden and maybe grilling salmon on the deck while watching the sunset over the Strait of Juan de Fuca. It was a quiet life, almost boringly peaceful compared to her previous existence, but Elena had earned that peace through years of service that had cost her more than most people would ever know. The nightmares came less frequently now, and she could sleep through thunderstorms without reaching for weapons that weren't there. The Cessna's GPS showed her position clearly, well within the civilian air corridor she'd filed for, and nowhere near any restricted airspace. She'd been careful about that, more careful than most civilian pilots needed to be, because she understood exactly what happened to aircraft that strayed into places they didn't belong. Her altitude was perfect, her heading was precise, and her transponder was squawking the assigned code that identified her to every radar facility between Seattle and the Canadian border. Elena checked her watch and calculated arrival time at Whidbey Island's airport. Another 20 minutes, maybe 25 if she encountered any headwinds coming off the water. The puppies were still sleeping peacefully, and the engine gauges remained steady in their normal ranges. Everything about the flight was routine and unremarkable, exactly the way she preferred it these days. The sky was clear, except for scattered clouds that posed no threat, and the radio chatter had settled into the comfortable background noise of a busy but well-controlled airspace. She reached for her water bottle and took a sip, thinking about the book she'd been reading and whether she had enough groceries for the week. Simple thoughts for a simple life, the kind of ordinary concerns that had once seemed impossibly luxurious when she'd been living out of duffel bags and sleeping in places that didn't appear on any maps. Elena had learned to appreciate the mundane details of civilian existence, the freedom to make plans that extended beyond the next mission briefing, the ability to call her sister without wondering if someone was listening to the conversation. Morning sun climbed higher, burning off the marine layer and revealing the full beauty of the Pacific Northwest landscape below. Elena never got tired of this view, never stopped feeling grateful for the privilege of seeing the world from this perspective. Flying had been her passion before it became her profession, and it remained her refuge even after everything that had happened. In the cockpit of her Cessna, surrounded by honest instruments and simple systems, she could still feel the pure joy that had made her want to be a pilot in the first place. Her radio headset carried the steady stream of air traffic control communications, pilots checking in and out of various facilities as they crossed the busy airspace around Seattle. Elena listened with the automatic attention of someone who'd spent decades in cockpits, but nothing required her immediate attention. She was just another aircraft in the system, properly identified and following all the rules, invisible in the best possible way. The restricted airspace around Naval Air Station Whidbey Island sprawled across thousands of square miles of Pacific Northwest sky, invisible boundaries marked only by GPS coordinates and stern warnings in aviation charts. Most civilian pilots gave the area a wide berth, understanding that military training operations happened here with aircraft that moved faster than sound and carried ordnance that could level city blocks. The base itself sat on the northern tip of Whidbey Island like a fortress of gray concrete and steel, its runways long enough to handle anything, from transport planes to experimental fighters that officially didn't exist. Inside the base's air traffic control tower, Senior Master Sergeant Jake Morrison tracked dozens of aircraft on radar screens that painted the morning sky in sweeping green arcs. At 52, Morrison had seen every kind of aviation emergency and protocol violation, imaginable during his 28 years in the Air Force. His weathered hands moved across control panels with practiced efficiency, while his eyes never stopped scanning the displays that showed aircraft positions, altitudes, and identification codes in constantly changing patterns of light. The tower rose 7 stories above the flight line, offering panoramic views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, their frequencies monitored by controllers who spoke in the clipped, precise language that kept military aviation safe and efficient. This morning's operations included a training exercise for F-35 Lightning II fighters, the Air Force's newest and most sophisticated combat aircraft, machines that cost more than $90 million each and carried technology that remained classified years after their introduction to service. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Morrison's headset crackled with routine communications as he coordinated the morning's flight schedule. 4 F-35s were preparing for a training mission that would take them through various altitude blocks and practice areas, their pilots running through pre-flight checklists and system tests that had become second nature through countless repetitions. These weren't rookie aviators learning to fly, but experienced combat pilots maintaining proficiency in aircraft that represented the cutting edge of American military technology. The lead pilot, Major Sarah Ken, had logged over 2,000 hours in F-35s and another 1,500 in F-16s before transitioning to the newer aircraft. Her voice came through Morrison's headset with the calm professionalism that marked elite military aviators, confirming takeoff clearance and flight plan details with efficient precision. Behind her, 3 other pilots prepared their aircraft with the methodical attention to detail that separated military aviation from civilian flying. Morrison watched their radar signatures appear on his scope as the F-35s lifted off from Whidbey's main runway, their engines producing the distinctive whine of advanced turbofans operating at full power. The aircraft climbed rapidly through the morning air, their stealth characteristics making them difficult to track even on military radar systems designed specifically to detect them. Within minutes they had disappeared into the restricted training airspace, 4 of the world's most advanced fighters carrying enough firepower to engage and destroy entire enemy air forces. The training exercise was designated Iron Eagle, a routine proficiency mission that would test the pilot's skills in air-to-air combat scenarios, electronic warfare procedures, and formation flying at various altitudes and speeds. Such exercises happen several times each week at bases across the country, part of the constant training regimen that kept American military pilots at the peak of their abilities. Morrison had coordinated hundreds of similar missions during his career, watching young aviators develop into seasoned combat veterans through countless hours of practice and instruction. Near the tower's communications station, Technical Sergeant Lisa Park monitored emergency frequencies and coordinated with civilian air traffic control facilities throughout the region. At 34, Park had transferred to Whidbey from Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where she'd spent 4 years managing some of the busiest military airspace in Europe. Her expertise in air traffic coordination had earned her assignment to one of the Air Force's most important training facilities, where mistake could result in aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars colliding in midair. The morning's weather was perfect for flying, with clear skies extending in all directions and visibility that allowed pilots to see for dozens of miles. Light winds from the northwest carried the salt smell of Puget Sound across the base, mixing with the distinctive odors of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid that marked military aviation facilities worldwide. The temperature was climbing toward what promised to be a beautiful Pacific Northwest day, the kind of weather that made flying a pure pleasure rather than a technical challenge. Morrison's radar scope showed the 4 F-35s spreading out across Their assigned training area, beginning the complex aerial ballet that would test their combat skills and equipment capabilities. Their aircraft were equipped with the most advanced avionics and weapons systems ever installed in fighter jets, capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously while remaining nearly invisible to enemy radar. The pilots flying them represented years of training and millions of dollars in education, the elite of American military aviation. The base's operations center buzzed with the controlled activity that marked a major training facility during peak flying hours. Weather specialists updated forecasts and wind conditions. Maintenance crews prepared backup aircraft in case of mechanical problems, and intelligence officers briefed pilots on simulated threat scenarios they would encounter during their missions. Everything operated with the precision and coordination that had made American military aviation the most capable and feared air force in history. Park's attention shifted between multiple radio frequencies as she monitored communications with civilian air traffic control centers throughout the region, Seattle Center, Boeing Tower, and smaller airports across Western Washington all coordinated their operations to ensure that military training flights could proceed without interfering with commercial and private aviation. The system worked through constant communication and precise adherence to predetermined flight paths and altitude restrictions that had been developed through decades of experience. The F-35s were now at altitude, beginning their first training scenario in a block of airspace that extended from 20,000 feet to the aircraft's operational ceiling. Their radar signatures appeared and disappeared on Morrison's scope as they maneuvered through combat formations, practicing the tactical procedures they would use if ever called upon to defend American airspace against real threats. The pilots' voices came through the radio with increasing intensity as they worked through complex engagement scenarios. Morrison had seen thousands of training missions during his career, but he never lost his appreciation for the skill and dedication required to operate modern military aircraft. The F-35 program had faced criticism and cost overruns during its development, but the finished product represented a quantum leap in combat capability that would keep American pilots alive and effective for decades to come. Watching these aircraft perform their training missions reminded him why he'd chosen to make the Air Force his career. The tower's communications equipment monitored dozens of different frequencies simultaneously, from the tactical nets used by the F-35 pilots to the coordination channels that linked military and civilian air traffic control facilities across the region. Park's trained ears sorted through the constant chatter, identifying anything that might require immediate attention, while filtering out the routine communications that marked normal flight operations. Her job required split-second decision-making and the ability to coordinate complex operations involving multiple aircraft and control agencies. The morning's training schedule included several different scenarios designed to test various aspects of F-35 capabilities and pilot proficiency. Air-to-air combat simulations would be followed by electronic warfare exercises, then formation flying at different altitudes and speeds. Each phase required precise coordination between the pilots and ground-based controllers, with safety protocols that had been developed through careful analysis of training accidents and near misses over many years. Morrison checked his watch and noted that the F-35s were proceeding exactly on schedule, their training mission unfolding with the mechanical precision that marked well-planned military operations. The pilots were executing their assigned maneuvers flawlessly, demonstrating the high level of proficiency that justified the enormous investment in their training and equipment. Everything about the morning's operations was proceeding normally, with no indication that anything unusual was about to happen in the busy airspace around Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Elena adjusted her radio frequency to monitor Seattle Center's approach control as she descended through 7,500 feet, the familiar weight of the Cessna's controls feeling solid and reassuring in her hands. The aircraft responded to her inputs with the honest predictability she'd grown to love. No fly-by-wire computers interpreting her commands or adjusting for conditions she hadn't anticipated. Every movement of the yoke translated directly to control surface deflections. Every throttle adjustment changed engine power immediately, and every slight bank or pitch change was exactly what she intended. Behind her, the 3 golden retriever puppies had awakened from their naps and were beginning to show interest in the world beyond their travel crates. One of them, a particularly bold female with markings that reminded Elena of a fighter pilot's leather jacket, pressed her nose against the crate's mesh door and watched the landscape scroll by below. Elena smiled at the puppy's curiosity, remembering her own first flights as a passenger when every cloud and shadow on the ground had seemed magical and mysterious. The Cessna's instrument panel displayed information that would have seemed impossibly primitive to pilots flying modern military aircraft, but Elena found comfort in the mechanical gauges and analog displays that required no computer processing or satellite connections. Oil pressure held steady in the green arc, fuel quantity showed adequate reserves for the remaining flight time, and engine temperature remained well within normal operating limits. These were the fundamental parameters that had mattered to pilots. For decades before digital avionics transformed aviation into something approaching science fiction. Elena's hands moved across the controls with unconscious precision, adjusting mixture and throttle settings for the descent, while scanning outside for other aircraft and monitoring radio frequencies for any traffic that might affect her flight path. The skills came automatically after thousands of hours in various cockpits. Muscle memory developed through repetition and maintained through constant practice. Flying had become as natural to her as walking, an extension of her physical being that required no conscious thought during routine operations. The morning air was smooth and stable, with only occasional light turbulence as thermal currents began developing over land masses warming under the climbing sun. Elena's Cessna cut through the atmosphere with minimal buffeting, its simple airframe and reliable engine performing exactly as designed by engineers who understood that not every aircraft needed to break the sound barrier or disappear from radar screens. Sometimes the most sophisticated technology was the kind that worked perfectly without calling attention to itself. Through her headset, Elena monitored the routine communications between Seattle Center and various aircraft transiting the busy airspace around Puget Sound. Commercial airliners checked in at assigned altitudes, private pilots reported position and intentions, and flight instructors worked with students learning to navigate the complex airspace surrounding one of the nation's major metropolitan areas. The radio chatter formed a constant background soundtrack to her flight, professional voices maintaining the careful coordination that kept aviation safe and efficient. Below her, the Pacific Northwest landscape revealed itself in stunning detail. As the morning haze continued to burn off under strengthening sunlight, the San Juan Islands scattered across blue water like emeralds on velvet, their forested shores and hidden coves reminding Elena of the many camping trips she'd taken during her rare leaves from military service. Mount Rainier dominated the southern horizon, its snow-covered peak catching the light and standing sentinel over the region like a geological lighthouse visible from hundreds of miles away. Elena's flight plan would take her directly over the southern edge of Whidbey Island before turning north to her home airport, a route she'd flown dozens of times without incident or complication. The GPS display showed her position relative to various navigation aids and airports, while her paper chart provided backup information in case the electronic systems failed. She'd learned long ago to never depend entirely on any single source of navigation information, particularly when flying alone over terrain that could be unforgiving to pilots who made mistakes. The Cessna's fuel consumption was exactly what she'd calculated during pre-flight planning, with adequate reserves to reach her destination plus the additional 45 minutes required by regulations for day VFR flight. Elena had always been conservative with fuel planning, remembering military missions where unexpected weather or tactical situations had required extended flight times that tested aircraft and pilot endurance to their limits. Running out of fuel was never an acceptable outcome, whether flying combat missions or delivering rescue puppies to their new homes. Her altimeter showed a steady descent as she followed the planned profile that would bring her to pattern altitude. For Whidbey Island Airport, the field served both civilian aircraft and some military operations, with parallel runways that could handle everything from small trainers to large transport aircraft. Elena had landed there many times during her years of civilian flying, always appreciating the professional approach controllers and well-maintained facilities that made operations safe and efficient. The radio frequency was relatively quiet this morning, with only occasional transmissions from aircraft reporting positions or requesting services from Seattle Center. Elena listened with the automatic attention of an experienced pilot while dividing her focus between instrument scans, weather, observation, and the constant search for other aircraft that might pose collision hazards. See and avoid remained the fundamental principle of visual flight rules, regardless of how sophisticated radar systems and air traffic control services had become. Elena's hands rested lightly on the Cessna's controls as she maintained her descent profile, feeling the aircraft's response to changing air density and temperature as she descended through different altitude layers. The engine's sound changed slightly as she reduced power for the descent, but remained smooth and reliable as it had throughout thousands of hours of operation under her careful maintenance and operation. She'd learned to listen to every mechanical sound her aircraft made, understanding that engines and systems often provided early warning of developing problems through subtle changes in their normal operation. Through the side window, she could see other aircraft in the distance, their positions and movement vectors automatically processed by instincts developed through years of flying in busy airspace. A commercial airliner passed several thousand feet above, leaving contrails in the cold upper atmosphere, while a smaller aircraft appeared to be conducting training maneuvers in a practice area to the east. The sky was busy but not crowded, with adequate spacing between aircraft to maintain safe separation. Without requiring constant maneuvering, the puppies behind her had settled back into relaxed positions, apparently satisfied that the strange vibrations and engine sounds posed no immediate threat to their well-being. Elena envied their ability to simply accept circumstances beyond their control, remembering times when she'd wished for similar peace of mind during complex military operations that required constant vigilance and split-second decision-making. Civilian flying offered the luxury of predictable procedures and well-established safety margins that made relaxation possible. Elena's transponder continued broadcasting the assigned identification code that marked her position on air traffic control radar screens throughout the region. The system worked through constant electronic communication between aircraft and ground facilities, creating a comprehensive picture of air traffic that allowed controllers to maintain safe separation between aircraft operating under instrument flight rules. Her Cessna appeared on radar scopes as a simple target with identification and altitude information. Just another aircraft transiting busy airspace in compliance with all applicable regulations. The Cessna's simple avionics suite provided all the information Elena needed for safe navigation and communication, without the complexity and expense of systems designed for professional airline operations. She'd chosen equipment that was reliable and maintainable rather than cutting-edge technology that might fail at critical moments. The aircraft's steam gauges and mechanical systems had proven themselves through decades of service in similar aircraft, requiring only routine maintenance and occasional component replacement to remain airworthy. Her descent continued smoothly as Elena approached the altitude where she would level off for the final approach to Whidbey Island Airport. The morning flight had proceeded exactly as planned. with perfect weather and routine operations that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with flying during her teenage years. The freedom and perspective that came with piloting an aircraft remained as compelling now as it had been when she'd first soloed in a similar Cessna. During college, Elena checked her position relative to the airport and began planning her approach and landing, considering wind conditions and traffic patterns that would ensure a safe arrival. The routine calculations and procedures came automatically, part of the systematic approach to flying that had kept her alive through thousands of hours in various aircraft under conditions ranging from perfect to life-threatening. Every landing required the same careful attention to detail, regardless of how many times she'd performed the same procedures. The coffee in the Naval Air Station Whidbey Island Control Tower had gone cold an hour ago, but Senior Master Sergeant Jake Morrison continued sipping it anyway, more from habit than any hope of caffeine benefits. His radar scope painted the morning sky in familiar green sweeps, tracking the 4 F-35s as they completed their first training scenario with the mechanical precision that marked elite military aviation. The aircraft moved through their assigned airspace like deadly ballet dancers, each pilot executing maneuvers that would have been impossible in earlier generations of fighter jets. Technical Sergeant Lisa Park monitored her bank of radio equipment with the focused attention of someone who understood that a single missed communication could result in catastrophic mid-air collisions. Her screens displayed aircraft positions across hundreds of square miles of Pacific Northwest airspace, civilian and military targets identified by transponder codes and radar signatures that told trained controllers everything they needed to know about aircraft type, altitude, and intended destination. The system worked through constant vigilance and split-second decision-making. Iron Eagle Flight, this is Whidbey Control. Park's voice carried the calm authority that marked experienced military controllers. You're cleared for Phase 2 of your training exercise. Maintain current altitude block and advise when ready for electronic warfare simulation. Major Sarah Chun's response crackled through the radio system with fighter pilot precision. Whidbey Control, Iron Eagle lead. Roger, proceeding to Phase 2. Flight of 4 F-35s, Angels 20, requesting clearance for defensive electronic countermeasures training. Morrison nodded approvingly as he watched the F-35s reposition themselves for the next phase of their mission. These pilots represented millions of dollars in training and years of experience, but they still followed procedures with the meticulous attention to detail that separated military aviation from civilian flying. One mistake at their speed and altitude could result in debris scattered across several counties and investigations that would consume months of official attention. The morning's operations included several civilian aircraft transiting the edges of the restricted airspace, their radar signatures clearly visible on Morrison's scope as they followed predetermined corridors designed to keep them safely separated from military training activities. Most civilian pilots gave military operations areas generous margins, understanding that high-performance fighters moved faster than their instruments could track and left little room for error. When unexpected encounters occurred, Park's attention shifted to a new radar contact approaching from the southeast, a small aircraft squawking a civilian transponder code and following what appeared to be a routine flight plan toward airports in the northern Puget Sound region. The target moved with the steady, predictable track of a single-engine aircraft under visual flight rules, probably a weekend pilot returning home from a cross-country trip or local flight training. Such contacts appeared on her scope dozens of times each day, civilian aviation proceeding alongside military operations through careful coordination and established procedures. The F-35s had spread out across their training area, beginning electronic warfare exercises that would test their ability to detect, identify, and defeat simulated enemy radar systems. Their sophisticated avionics suites included electronic countermeasures equipment, that could jam enemy communications and create false targets on hostile radar screens, capabilities that represented significant advances over earlier generation. Fighters. Morrison watched their positions shift as they maneuvered through scenarios based on intelligence estimates of current foreign military capabilities. Inside the tower, the atmosphere remained professionally calm despite the complexity of coordinating multiple high-performance aircraft operating at different altitudes and speeds. Charts covered every available wall space, showing airspace boundaries, navigation aids, and emergency procedures that controllers needed to reference instantly during crisis situations. Radio frequencies were monitored continuously, with backup communication systems ready to activate if primary equipment failed during critical operations. Morrison's experience included tours at bases throughout the world. From the desert facilities of Nevada, where experimental aircraft tested capabilities that wouldn't be acknowledged for decades, to the crowded airspace around major European installations where American and Allied fighters trained together in preparation for potential conflicts. Each assignment had taught him something new about the challenges of managing military aviation in an increasingly complex world where civilian and military aircraft shared limited airspace. The civilian aircraft approaching from the southeast continued on its steady course, apparently unaware of the military training exercise taking place just beyond the boundaries of controlled airspace. Park noted its position and predicted track, confirming that it would remain well clear of the F-35's operating area as long as current course and speed were maintained. The aircraft's transponder provided identification and altitude information that allowed controllers to maintain situational awareness without direct radio contact. Park's radio crackled with the transmission from Seattle Center, the civilian air traffic control facility that managed much of the region's non-military aviation. Whidbey Control, Seattle Center. Be advised, we're showing a civilian aircraft, November-7-4-2-Papa-Alpha, tracking northbound at 7,500 feet. Appears to be transitioning your area en route to destination unknown. No flight plan on file for your airspace. Morrison frowned as he located the aircraft on his radar scope, noting its position relative to the F-35's training area. The civilian pilot might be following a perfectly legal route through airspace that remained technically unrestricted, but the proximity to ongoing military operations created potential complications that required careful monitoring. Military and civilian aircraft operated under different rules and performance parameters that could create dangerous situations if not properly coordinated. Seattle Center Whidbey Control. Roger, we have the target. Civilian aircraft appears to be following a legal route, but will pass close to active military operations. Do you have communication with that aircraft? The response came immediately. Whidbey Control, Seattle Center. Negative direct communication. Aircraft is operating under visual flight rules and is not required to contact us in that airspace. We're showing the aircraft maintaining steady course and altitude, no indication of navigation problems or emergency conditions. Park exchanged glances with Morrison, both understanding the potential implications of having uncoordinated civilian traffic near high-performance military aircraft conducting training exercises. The F-35s were operating at speeds and altitudes that could bring them into proximity with the civilian aircraft in minutes if course changes became necessary. While the civilian pilot was breaking no regulations, the situation required careful attention to prevent misunderstandings that could escalate quickly. The F-35s continued their electronic warfare training, their pilots focused on complex scenarios that demanded complete attention to sophisticated avionics systems and tactical procedures. Major Chun's flight was executing maneuvers that simulated combat conditions, using radar and electronic countermeasures in ways that replicated real-world threats they might encounter during actual military operations. Their training scenarios were based on intelligence assessments of foreign military capabilities, creating realistic conditions that tested pilot skills and equipment performance. Morrison's radar scope showed the civilian aircraft continuing its northbound track, apparently unaware of the military training exercise taking place nearby. The pilot was probably enjoying a routine flight through some of the most beautiful airspace in the country, focused on navigation and aircraft operation rather than the sophisticated combat training happening just beyond visual range. The separation between military and civilian aviation normally prevented such encounters, but the busy airspace around Puget Sound occasionally created situations where different types of operations intersected. Park monitored multiple radio frequencies, simultaneously listening for any indication that the civilian aircraft might be experiencing navigation difficulties or equipment problems that could affect its flight path. Civilian pilots operating under visual flight rules were not required to maintain constant radio contact with air traffic control, but they were expected to follow established procedures and maintain safe separation from other aircraft. The system worked through pilot training and adherence to regulations that had been developed through decades of aviation experience. The morning's training exercise was proceeding exactly as planned, with the F-35s demonstrating the capabilities that justified their enormous development costs and complex maintenance requirements. Their pilots were among the most skilled aviators in the world, selected through rigorous screening processes and trained to operate the most advanced fighters ever built. Morrison took professional satisfaction in watching them execute their assigned missions with the precision that marked elite military aviation. The civilian aircraft continued its steady approach toward the northern edge of the restricted airspace, its radar signature showing no deviation from the straight-line course that would take it past the military training area. Park calculated intercept angles and closure rates, determining that the aircraft would remain well clear of the F-35s operating area unless unexpected course changes occurred. The separation would be adequate for normal circumstances, but military training exercises created dynamic situations where aircraft positions could change rapidly. Morrison had seen similar encounters during his years in air traffic control. Situations where civilian and military aviation intersected in ways that required careful coordination to prevent misunderstandings. Most civilian pilots respected military operations areas and gave them generous margins, understanding that high-performance fighters operated under different rules and capabilities than civilian aircraft. The system usually worked smoothly, but occasional incidents reminded everyone involved that constant vigilance remained essential. The F-35s were now fully engaged in their electronic warfare training, their sophisticated systems creating an electromagnetic environment that simulated combat conditions. Their pilots worked through scenarios that tested their ability to operate in contested airspace while maintaining communication and coordination with other aircraft. The training was essential preparation for potential real-world missions, where such capabilities might mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The tension in the would-be island control tower escalated as the civilian aircraft continued its northbound track, now clearly visible on every radar scope as it approached the invisible boundary between unrestricted airspace and the military training area. Morrison's jaw tightened as he watched the radar blip maintain its steady course, apparently oblivious to the 4 F-35 Lightning jets conducting high-speed maneuvers just miles away. The civilian pilot was operating legally, but legal didn't always mean safe when military aircraft were involved in combat training exercises. Iron Eagle lead, would-be control. Park's voice carried a new edge of concern. Be advised, civilian aircraft bearing 270 from your position, 7 miles and closing. Single-engine aircraft, altitude 7,500 feet. Appears to be transitioning north of your operating area. Major Chun's response came immediately, her fighter pilot training evident in the clipped precision of her words. Would-be control, Iron Eagle lead. Roger, we have unknown civilian traffic on radar. Request immediate identification and intentions of that aircraft. We're conducting electronic warfare training with active jamming systems. Morrison felt his stomach tighten as he realized the implications of Qian's transmission. The F-35's electronic warfare suite was capable of disrupting civilian aircraft navigation and communication systems, potentially leaving the unknown pilot unable to navigate or communicate with air traffic control. What had been a routine training exercise was suddenly becoming a potential safety crisis that could result in a mid-air collision between a multi-million-dollar fighter jet and a civilian aircraft. The civilian aircraft's transponder continued, broadcasting its identification code, but the pilot remained silent on all monitored frequencies. Under visual flight rules, the pilot was not required to maintain radio contact with air traffic control, but the lack of communication made it impossible to warn them about the nearby military operations. Morrison had seen similar situations develop into disasters when civilian pilots flew into restricted airspace without understanding the dangers they were creating. Park's fingers flew across her control panel as she attempted to establish radio contact with the civilian aircraft. Aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha. This is Whidbey Island Control on guard frequency. Please respond immediately regarding your intentions and destination. You are approaching active military training airspace. The radio remained silent, except for the routine chatter of other aircraft operating in the region. The civilian pilot either wasn't monitoring the emergency frequency or was experiencing communication difficulties that prevented them from responding to air traffic control. Morrison cursed under his breath, knowing that every second of delay reduced the options for safely resolving the situation. Major Chun's voice crackled through the radio system with increasing urgency. Whidbey Control, Iron Eagle lead. Civilian aircraft is now 5 miles and closing on our position. We're conducting active electronic countermeasures training. That aircraft needs to be vectored away from our operating area immediately, or we'll have to suspend our mission. Morrison knew that suspending the F-35 training mission would cost thousands of dollars in wasted fuel and lost training time, but the alternative could be catastrophic. Fighter jets and civilian aircraft operated in completely different performance envelopes, with closure rates that could result in collision before either pilot had time to react. The F-35s were nearly invisible on civilian radar systems, while their speed and maneuverability made them extremely dangerous to slower aircraft that couldn't match their performance. The civilian aircraft continued its northbound track, apparently unaware of the developing crisis. Morrison's radar scope showed the target maintaining steady altitude and heading, with no indication that the pilot was aware of the nearby military operations. The aircraft's transponder painted a clear picture of its position and movement, but provided no information about pilot intentions or awareness of the situation. Park tried again to establish radio contact, her voice carrying the controlled urgency of an experienced controller facing a developing emergency. Aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha, Whidbey Control. You are entering restricted military training airspace. Please respond immediately and alter course to avoid active fighter operations. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison watched the radar blip continue its steady progression toward the area where 4 F-35s were conducting high-speed maneuvers at altitudes that could bring them into proximity with the civilian aircraft. The closure rate was increasing as the military fighters repositioned themselves for the next phase of their training exercise, creating a dynamic situation where aircraft positions changed rapidly. Major Qian's transmission carried the flat tone of a combat pilot preparing for potential emergency action. Whidbey Control, Iron Eagle lead. We're suspending electronic warfare training due to civilian traffic. Repositioning flight to maintain safe separation, but we need immediate clearance. To intercept and identify unknown aircraft if it continues present course. Morrison felt the weight of command decision-making as he realized that the situation was escalating beyond routine air traffic control procedures. The civilian aircraft was operating legally in unrestricted airspace, but its presence was disrupting military training operations and potentially creating hazardous conditions for both civilian and military pilots. The rules of engagement for such situations were clear, but applying them required split-second decisions that could have far-reaching consequences. The F-35s began repositioning themselves to maintain safe separation from the civilian aircraft, while remaining ready to intercept if the situation required more aggressive action. Their pilots were among the most skilled aviators in the world, trained to operate in contested airspace and make tactical decisions under pressure. Morrison watched their radar signatures shift as they maneuvered through three-dimensional space at speeds that civilian pilots couldn't imagine. Park's communications equipment showed multiple attempts to contact the civilian aircraft on various frequencies, but none had produced any response. The pilot might be experiencing radio problems, or simply not monitoring the frequencies that air traffic control was using to attempt contact. Under visual flight rules, civilian pilots were not required to maintain constant radio communication, but the lack of response was creating a dangerous situation that required immediate resolution. Morrison's experience included numerous encounters with civilian aircraft that had strayed into restricted airspace, usually through navigation errors or equipment failures that left pilots unaware of their position relative to military operations. Most such incidents resolved quickly through radio communication and course corrections, but occasionally situations developed where more aggressive intervention became necessary to prevent accidents. The civilian aircraft was now clearly visible on every radar scope in the control tower, its steady northbound track taking it closer to the area where the F-35s were conducting their training mission. The separation was still adequate for normal operations, but military training exercises created dynamic conditions where aircraft positions could change rapidly and unpredictably. Morrison knew that the margin for error was shrinking with each passing minute. Major Chun's voice cut through the radio chatter with the authority of a combat pilot who had made the transition from training to potential emergency response. Whidbey Control, Iron Eagle lead. We're moving to intercept civilian aircraft for visual identification. Flight is configured for intercept mission, requesting clearance to approach unknown aircraft and attempt visual contact. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Morrison understood the implications of authorizing an intercept mission against a civilian aircraft, but the alternatives were becoming increasingly limited as the unknown pilot continued toward the military training area without responding to air traffic control communications. The F-35s were designed for exactly this type of mission, but using them against civilian aircraft was a serious escalation that would require detailed justification and official review. Park's attempts to contact the civilian aircraft had become increasingly urgent, her professional composure barely containing the stress of watching a potential disaster develop in real time. Aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha. This is Whidbey Control on all frequencies. You are approaching restricted military airspace. Please respond immediately and state your intentions. The radio remained silent except for the distant chatter of other aircraft operating in the region, their pilots unaware of the drama unfolding. In the airspace around Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, Morrison watched the civilian aircraft's radar signature continue its steady progression, apparently oblivious to the 4 F-35 Lightning jets that were now maneuvering to intercept and identify what had become an unknown aircraft operating in proximity to sensitive military operations. The morning's routine training exercise had transformed into a potential national security incident, with implications that extended far beyond the immediate safety concerns of preventing midder collisions. Morrison's finger hovered over the radio switch that would authorize the F-35s to intercept the civilian aircraft, knowing that the decision would be scrutinized by investigators and congressional committees if anything went wrong in the next few minutes. Elena's peaceful morning flight shattered without warning as her Cessna's radio suddenly erupted with urgent transmissions on the emergency frequency. The familiar calm of routine aviation was replaced by the sharp, authoritative voices of military controllers demanding immediate response to communications she hadn't heard. Her blood ran cold as she realized that somehow, despite careful flight planning and meticulous attention to her route, she had apparently wandered into a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond normal air traffic control procedures. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha. This is Whidbey Control on guard frequency. Respond immediately. You are entering restricted military airspace. Acknowledge this transmission and state your intentions. Elena's hands moved instinctively to her radio controls, but she paused as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. Her GPS showed her position clearly within the civilian air corridor. She had filed nowhere near any restricted areas marked on her current charts. The transponder was squawking the assigned code that should have identified her to every radar facility in the region, and her altitude was exactly what she had planned for this phase of the flight. The puppies in their crates behind her sensed the sudden tension in the cockpit, their earlier contentment replaced by whimpering sounds that indicated they could feel her stress, even if they couldn't understand its source. Elena's training kicked in automatically as she began analyzing the situation with the systematic approach that had kept her alive through countless emergencies in aircraft, far more complex than her simple Cessna. Her first instinct was to respond to the controller's demands, but something in their tone and the nature of their communications triggered warning signals that had been programmed into her consciousness through years of operations where revealing too much information could have fatal consequences. Military controllers didn't normally use such urgent language with civilian aircraft unless something far more serious than routine airspace violations was happening. Elena's eyes swept across her instrument panel, confirming that all systems were operating normally and that her position was exactly where she expected it to be. The GPS showed her track aligned with the flight plan she had filed. The engine gauges remained in their normal ranges, and the radio equipment was functioning properly. Whatever was happening, it wasn't the result of mechanical failure or navigation error on her part. The radio crackled again with increasing urgency. Aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha, Whidbey Control. You are directed to respond immediately on this frequency. Military aircraft are being vectored to intercept your position. Comply with this transmission immediately. The word intercept hit Elena like a physical blow, awakening memories and instincts that she had spent 3 years trying to suppress. Military aircraft didn't intercept civilian planes for routine airspace violations. Intercepts happened when unknown aircraft posed potential security threats, when pilots failed to respond to communications, or when situations developed that required immediate identification and possible engagement of hostile aircraft. Elena's mind raced through possibilities as she tried to understand how a routine charity flight had transformed into what appeared to be a potential military incident. Her paperwork was proper, her aircraft was registered and airworthy, and her pilot's license and medical certificate were current. Nothing about her flight should have attracted the attention of military interceptors, unless something had gone wrong with the identification systems that were supposed to prevent such encounters. Through her headset, she could hear additional radio transmissions that confirmed her worst fears. Military controllers were coordinating with fighter aircraft, using tactical language that indicated they were treating her small Cessna as an unknown aircraft that potentially posed a threat to national security. The professional composure in their voices couldn't hide the underlying tension that marked serious aviation emergencies. Elena's hands remained steady on the controls, but her heart rate increased as she realized that fighter jets were being directed to intercept her position. Modern military fighters operated at speeds that could bring them from over the horizon to visual range in minutes, and their pilots were trained to treat unidentified aircraft as potential threats until proven otherwise. The closure rate between her 120-knot Cessna and fighters capable of supersonic flight meant that she had very little time to resolve whatever misunderstanding had created this situation. Her radio equipment was functioning normally, but Elena hesitated to respond to the controller's demands as she tried to process the implications of revealing her identity to military personnel, who might run background checks that could uncover classified information about her previous service. Her discharge paperwork had been carefully structured to protect operational security, but electronic databases contained information that could compromise missions and personnel who were still active in classified operations. The morning sky, that had seemed so peaceful just minutes earlier, now felt hostile and threatening as Elena realized that somewhere nearby, military aircraft were maneuvering to intercept her small plane. Her civilian clothes and unremarkable appearance would provide no protection if the situation escalated beyond visual identification procedures. Fighter pilots were trained to engage threats quickly and decisively, with rules of engagement that prioritized mission success over individual survival. Elena's GPS showed her position relative to various military installations in the region, and she began to understand how her flight path might have been misinterpreted by security personnel who were responsible for protecting sensitive facilities from potential threats. The post-9/11's aviation environment had created protocols that treated any unusual aircraft movement as potentially hostile, particularly when communications couldn't be established with unidentified pilots. Her fuel gauges showed adequate reserves for normal operations, but Elena knew that if military aircraft were vectored to intercept her position, the situation could develop rapidly into something that required immediate decision-making and possible emergency procedures. Fighter jets operated in a completely different performance envelope than civilian aircraft, and encounters between them required careful coordination to prevent accidents that could be catastrophic for both aircraft involved. The radio transmissions continued with increasing urgency, and Elena could hear the controlled tension in the controllers' voices as they coordinated the intercept mission. Military air traffic control operated under different rules and procedures than civilian facilities, with authority to direct aircraft movements and require immediate compliance with instructions that might seem arbitrary to civilian pilots, but were based on security considerations that extended far beyond normal aviation safety. Elena's mind flashed to similar situations she had experienced during her military service, when unidentified aircraft had been intercepted and identified through procedures that could escalate quickly from routine identification to active engagement if pilots failed to comply with instructions. She understood exactly what was happening from the military perspective, but she also knew that her position as a civilian pilot put her at a significant disadvantage in dealing with controllers who had authority to treat her aircraft as a potential threat. The morning sun continued to climb higher, but its warmth couldn't dispel the chill that had settled over Elena's peaceful flight. The puppies behind her had grown quiet, sensing the tension that filled the small cockpit as their human companion dealt with a situation that had transformed from routine to potentially dangerous in a matter of minutes. Their trust in her ability to handle whatever was happening reminded Elena that she had responsibilities that extended beyond her own safety. Elena's training and experience had prepared her for many types of emergencies, but civilian aircraft Operations provided few options for dealing with military intercepts. Her Cessna was designed for routine transportation and training flights, not for evading or engaging with high-performance fighters whose capabilities exceeded anything in civilian aviation. The disparity in aircraft performance meant that any encounter would be entirely on the military pilot's terms. Her radio equipment crackled again with transmissions that indicated the intercept was proceeding as planned, with military aircraft moving to visual range of her position. Elena knew that fighter pilots would be following established procedures for identifying unknown aircraft, but she also understood that those procedures were designed to quickly determine whether unidentified aircraft posed threats that required immediate action to neutralize. The peaceful morning flight that had begun with such promise was now approaching a crisis point that would require Elena to make decisions that could have far-reaching consequences for her carefully constructed civilian life. The military controllers' demands for immediate response could no longer be ignored, but revealing her identity might expose classified information that she had sworn to protect even after leaving active service. Elena's hands tightened on the Cessna's controls as she prepared to respond to the increasingly urgent communications from military controllers who were coordinating what appeared to be a full-scale intercept of her small aircraft. The situation had moved far beyond routine air traffic control procedures, and she realized that the next few minutes would determine whether her quiet civilian existence could survive the scrutiny that was about to be focused on her identity and background. The 4 F-35 Lightning jets materialized around Elena's Cessna like metallic predators emerging from the morning sky, their sleek profiles cutting through the air with a precision that made her single-engine aircraft seem as fragile as a butterfly surrounded by hawks. The lead fighter positioned itself off her left wing, close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet and oxygen mask through the cockpit canopy, while the other 3 F-35s took positions that effectively boxed her small plane into a formation. She couldn't escape even if her Cessna had possessed 10 times its actual performance. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she found herself staring at the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, machines that cost more than most small towns' annual budgets and carried enough firepower to level city blocks. The F-35's angular surfaces and advanced materials made it appear simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, a testament to engineering excellence designed specifically for dominating airspace and eliminating threats to national security. She had seen these aircraft during her military service, but never from the perspective of a civilian pilot who might be considered a potential target. Major Sarah Chun's voice crackled through the radio with the calm authority of a combat pilot who had transitioned from training exercise to potential real-world intercept mission. Unknown aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha. This is Iron Eagle Lead. You are directed to immediately comply with instructions from military air traffic control. We are currently in formation with your aircraft and prepared to escort you to the nearest suitable airfield. The words carried implications that Elena understood better than most civilian pilots. Military intercepts followed established procedures that could escalate rapidly from visual identification to forced landing or, in extreme circumstances, to engagement of aircraft that posed imminent threats to national security. The F-35 pilots were following protocols that had been developed through decades of experience with aircraft that had violated restricted airspace or failed to respond to air traffic control communications. Elena's hands remained steady on the Cessna's controls, but her mind raced through the implications of her situation. The fighters could force her to land at any airfield of their choosing, where she would be subject to detailed questioning and background checks that might expose classified information about her previous military service. Her carefully constructed civilian identity could be compromised by investigators who would want to understand exactly who she was and why her aircraft had attracted the attention of military interceptors. The lead F-35 moved closer to her Cessna, its pilot using hand signals to communicate instructions that supplemented the radio transmissions. Elena could see Major Chun clearly through the fighter's canopy, her helmet and oxygen mask making her appear like a modern warrior pilot whose training and equipment represented the pinnacle of military aviation technology. The visual contact between the two aircraft established a personal connection that made the situation feel more immediate and dangerous. Elena's radio crackled again with transmissions from Whidbey Control, the military controllers coordinating the intercept mission with the precision that marked professional military operations. Iron Eagle Lead, Whidbey Control. You are cleared to escort unknown aircraft to Naval Air Station Whidbey Island for identification and investigation. Use minimum force necessary to ensure compliance with landing instructions. The phrase minimum force necessary carried ominous implications that Elena understood from her own military experience. Fighter pilots were trained to use whatever level of force was required to complete their missions, with rules of engagement that prioritized mission success over individual considerations. If she failed to comply with their instructions, the F-35s had numerous options for compelling her cooperation, ranging from aggressive maneuvering to demonstrate their intentions to more direct methods of forcing her aircraft to land. Elena's Cessna was completely outmatched by the military fighters surrounding her, its maximum performance capabilities insignificant compared to aircraft that could exceed the speed of sound and maneuver in ways that would destroy civilian aircraft attempting to follow their movements. The F-35s could maintain formation with her slow-moving plane easily, but their presence transformed her peaceful morning flight into a potentially life-threatening situation that required immediate resolution. The morning sky that had seemed so welcoming just minutes earlier now felt like a cage, with the 4 F-35s controlling every aspect of her flight path and destination. Elena understood that she was no longer in command of her own aircraft, despite maintaining physical control of the Cessna's flight controls. The military pilots had authority to direct her movements and could use force to ensure compliance if she attempted to deviate from their instructions. Major Chun's voice returned to the radio frequency with increased urgency. Unknown aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha. Acknowledge receipt of landing instructions. You are directed to proceed to Naval Air Station Whidbey Island under military escort. Failure to comply with these instructions will result in additional measures to ensure your compliance. Elena's finger hovered over the radio transmit button as she realized that her silence was being interpreted as potential hostility by the quota military pilots and controllers who were responsible for protecting airspace around sensitive installations. Her failure to respond to their communications had escalated the situation beyond routine intercept procedures, creating a scenario where her aircraft might be treated as a genuine threat to national security. The puppies in their crates behind her had grown completely silent, their animal instincts telling them that something dangerous was happening even though they couldn't understand the nature of the threat. Elena felt responsible for their safety as well as her own, knowing that any escalation of the current situation could result in consequences that extended far beyond her personal concerns about maintaining her civilian cover. The F-35s maintained their formation positions around her Cessna with mechanical precision, their pilots demonstrating the skill and discipline that marked elite military aviation. Elena could see the lead fighter's pilot making additional hand signals, apparently attempting to establish visual communication since radio contact had not been successful. The professional competence of the military pilots was evident in their smooth formation flying and coordinated movements. Elena's GPS showed her position relative to Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, where the military controllers were directing her to land under escort. The base was equipped with facilities for handling aircraft investigations and pilot interrogations, with security personnel who would conduct thorough background checks on anyone who had attracted the attention of military interceptors. Her arrival there would trigger procedures that could expose her classified military background. The radio frequency crackled with additional transmissions as other military aircraft in the area were notified of the ongoing intercept mission. Elena could hear the controlled tension in the controllers' voices as they coordinated with multiple agencies to ensure that appropriate personnel would be available to investigate her aircraft and conduct the detailed questioning that would follow her forced landing at the Naval Air Station. Elena's mind flashed to similar intercept missions she had participated in during her military service, when unidentified aircraft had been escorted to secure facilities for investigation and identification. She understood the procedures that would be followed once her aircraft was on the ground, including the systematic background checks that would be conducted on any pilot who had failed to respond to military communications in restricted airspace. Morning sun reflected off the F-35's angular surfaces, creating brief flashes of light that reminded Elena of the advanced materials and coatings that made these aircraft nearly invisible to enemy radar systems. The fighters represented billions of dollars in research and development, designed to maintain American air superiority against potential adversaries who possessed increasingly sophisticated aviation technology. Major Chun's voice cut through the radio chatter with the authority of a combat pilot who had exhausted diplomatic options. Unknown aircraft November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha. This is your final warning. You are directed to acknowledge these transmissions immediately and comply with landing instructions. Continued failure to respond will be interpreted as hostile intent. The words hostile intent carried implications that Elena understood better than most civilian pilots. Military rules of engagement authorize the use of force against aircraft that pose threats to national security, with procedures that could escalate rapidly from warning shots to complete engagement. The F-35 pilots were trained to make split-second decisions about when unidentified aircraft transitioned from potential threats to actual enemies that required immediate neutralization. Elena's training and experience had prepared her for many types of emergencies, but she had never anticipated finding herself in the position of being intercepted by military fighters while flying a civilian aircraft. The situation required immediate decision-making that could have consequences extending far beyond the current flight, potentially compromising the carefully constructed civilian life she had built after leaving military service. The 4 F-35s continued their formation around her Cessna, their pilots maintaining the professional discipline that marked elite military aviation while preparing for whatever escalation might be necessary to complete their mission. Elena realized that she had reached a decision point where continued silence would be interpreted as confirmation that her aircraft posed a threat to national security, triggering procedures that could result in her Cessna being forced down by methods that might not ensure her survival. Elena's finger finally pressed the radio transmit button, but the words that emerged from her lips carried a weight that transformed the morning sky around Naval Air Station Whidbey Island into something approaching hallowed ground. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned the right to speak those particular words through years of classified operations that officially never existed. Iron Eagle Lead. This is Silent Storm. Authentication code Whiskey-7-7-Alpha-Charlie-Bravo. Stand down your intercept immediately. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear the Cessna's engine change pitch slightly as a thermal current shifted the air around her aircraft. Through her headset, she could hear the sudden intake of breath from Major Chun, followed by what sounded like muffled communications between the F-35 pilots as they processed the implications of what they had just heard. The callsign silent storm wasn't something that appeared in any standard military database, but it carried authentication codes that would immediately verify her identity to anyone with the appropriate Security clearance. In the Whidbey Island Control Tower. Senior Master Sergeant Jake Morrison's coffee mug slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor, sending brown liquid splashing across charts and equipment that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the voice that had just identified itself on the emergency frequency. Technical Sergeant Lisa Park's hands froze over her radio controls as she stared at her supervisor, both of them understanding that they had just witnessed something that would require immediate notification of their chain of command, and possibly agencies whose existence wasn't officially acknowledged. Major Chun's voice crackled through the radio system with a tone that had completely changed from the confident authority of a fighter pilot conducting a routine intercept to something approaching reverence mixed with professional uncertainty. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle lead. Please authenticate your identity with additional verification codes. We are not showing your callsign in our current operational database. Elena's response came without hesitation, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone reciting information that had been burned into her memory through repetition and the absolute necessity of never making mistakes when lives depended on accurate identification. Iron Eagle lead, Silent Storm, secondary authentication, Phantom-Delta-9-2-7-Tango. Tertiary authentication, Blackout-Charlie-7-Alpha-9-Delta. I am operating under standing orders that supersede your current mission parameters. The radio frequency fell silent again, except for the distant static that marked the electronic boundaries between different communication systems. Elena could see the lead F-35 pilot's helmet turning toward her cockpit, and she imagined Major Chun's face behind the oxygen mask as the fighter pilot processed authentication codes that would immediately trigger searches through classified databases that contained information about operations and personnel that didn't appear in standard military records. Morrison's hands shook slightly as he reached for the secure telephone that connected the Whidbey Island Control Tower directly to the base commander's office and, if necessary, to facilities in Washington, D.C., where decisions about classified operations were made by people whose names never appeared in public directories. The authentication codes that Elena had transmitted would trigger automatic notifications to intelligence agencies and military commands that maintained oversight of operations that were officially denied to exist. Elena's Cessna continued its steady flight path while surrounded by 4 F-35 Lightning jets, whose pilots were now faced with a situation that wasn't covered in any of their training manuals or standard operating procedures. The authentication codes she had transmitted would be verified within minutes through secure communication channels that connected military installations worldwide. But the implications of those codes meant that the routine intercept mission had suddenly become something far more complex and potentially sensitive. Park's radio equipment crackled to life with transmissions from higher command levels as news of the authentication codes spread through military communication networks. Elena could hear fragments of conversations between controllers and supervisors, their voices carrying the controlled tension that marked military personnel who understood that they were dealing with classified information that could have implications extending far beyond their immediate responsibilities. The morning sun continued its climb through the Pacific Northwest sky, but the atmosphere around the 5 aircraft had fundamentally changed as Elena's identity began to propagate through military databases and communication systems. Her callsign Silent Storm wasn't just a random designation, but a carefully constructed identifier that carried information about operations and capabilities that remained classified years after their completion. Major Chun's voice returned to the radio frequency with a tone that reflected the complex mixture of professional respect and personal curiosity that marked military personnel when they encountered legendary figures from their service's history. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle lead. We are receiving verification of your authentication codes through secure channels. Please advise your current mission status and intended destination. Elena's response was carefully measured, providing enough information to satisfy immediate operational requirements while maintaining the security protocols that still governed her activities even in civilian life. Iron Eagle Lead, Silent Storm. I am conducting authorized civilian flight operations under cover protocols that remain classified. My intended destination is Whidbey Island Airport for routine aircraft operations. I request immediate clearance to proceed without further interference. The phrase cover protocols carried implications that every military pilot understood, referring to operations where personnel maintained civilian identities while conducting activities that supported national security objectives. Elena's words indicated that her current civilian status might be part of ongoing operations that required protection from exposure, even to military personnel who lacked the appropriate clearance levels to know about such programs. Morrison's secure telephone conversation had attracted the attention of additional personnel in the control tower, their faces reflecting the mixture of professional curiosity and security awareness that marked military personnel when classified information suddenly appeared in routine operations. Elena could see through her cockpit window that the F-35s were maintaining their formation positions, but their pilots were clearly receiving additional instructions through secure communication channels that weren't monitored by civilian radio equipment. The verification process for Elena's authentication codes was proceeding through multiple levels of military and intelligence community databases, each query triggering additional searches that would eventually provide complete verification of her identity and current status. The system was designed to prevent unauthorized use of classified callsigns and authentication codes, but legitimate identifiers would be confirmed quickly through secure channels that connected military installations worldwide. Elena's GPS showed her position relative to Whidbey Island Airport, where she had originally planned to land for fuel and a brief rest before continuing to her home base. The morning flight that had begun as a routine charity mission had transformed into something that would require detailed debriefing and possibly official reports that would document her encounter with military interceptors and the authentication codes that had ended the intercept mission. Park's radio equipment displayed incoming transmissions from multiple military commands as Elena's identity verification proceeded through appropriate channels. The secure communication systems that connected various military installations were designed to quickly verify classified information, while maintaining operational security that protected sensitive operations from unauthorized exposure. The F-35 pilots were receiving updated instructions through their secure communication systems, their professional training evident in the way they continued to maintain formation while processing information that was changing the nature of their mission. Elena could see the lead fighter pilot's helmet moving as Major Chun apparently consulted additional displays and received communications that weren't being broadcast on the frequencies that civilian aircraft could monitor, preparing and narrating. This type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena's mind flashed to similar situations during her military service, when classified operations had intersected with routine military activities, creating complex scenarios that required careful coordination between different command levels and security organizations. The authentication codes she had transmitted would eventually provide complete verification of her identity and current status, but the process required time and careful attention to security protocols that governed classified information. The morning sky around Whidbey Island had become the scene of a complex military operation that extended far beyond the original intercept mission, with implications that reached into classified databases and command structures that maintained oversight of operations that didn't appear in public records. Elena's callsign, Silent Storm, represented years of service and sacrifice that had earned her the right to use authentication codes that carried immediate authority, even in situations where her civilian appearance might suggest otherwise. Morrison's secure telephone conversation had escalated to command levels that would make decisions about how to handle Elena's situation while maintaining the security protocols that protected classified operations from unauthorized exposure. The verification process was proceeding according to established procedures, but the implications of confirmed authentication codes would require careful consideration of operational security requirements that extended beyond immediate aviation safety concerns. The 4 F-35s continued their formation around Elena's Cessna, their pilots maintaining professional discipline while processing information that was fundamentally changing their understanding of the intercept mission they had been ordered to conduct. Elena's authentication codes represented authority that superseded routine military procedures, but confirming that authority required verification through secure channels that connected military installations and intelligence agencies worldwide. The secure communication channels between Whidbey Island and Washington, D.C. crackled with encrypted transmissions as Elena's authentication codes triggered automatic alerts throughout the military intelligence community. Within minutes of her transmission, classified databases that existed in underground facilities were cross-referencing her callsign, Silent Storm, with operational records that carried security classifications so high that most military personnel didn't know they existed. The verification process was proceeding with the systematic thoroughness that marked intelligence operations where mistakes could compromise national security. Major Chun's voice returned to the radio frequency, with a tone that reflected the profound shift in her understanding of the situation. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle Lead. We are receiving confirmation of your authentication codes through multiple secure channels. Command is directing us to provide full escort support for your mission. Please advise any special requirements or security protocols for your current operations. Elena's response carried the quiet authority of someone who had learned to command respect through actions rather than rank or title. Iron Eagle Lead, Silent Storm. I require immediate clearance to proceed to Whidbey Island Airport without further interference. Maintain minimum safe distance and do not attempt to communicate with civilian air traffic control regarding my identity or mission parameters. This operation remains classified under compartmentalized access protocols. The phrase compartmentalized access protocols sent additional ripples through the military communication network, indicating that Elena's mission was protected by security measures that restricted information to personnel with specific clearances and operational need to know. Such protocols were reserved for operations that could compromise national security if exposed to unauthorized personnel, even those within the military command structure. In the Whidbey Island Control Tower, Morrison found himself dealing with a situation that exceeded his security clearance and operational experience. His secure telephone had connected him directly to the base commander's office, where Colonel James Hartford was receiving real-time updates from intelligence agencies that confirmed Elena's identity and current operational status. The colonel's voice carried the controlled tension of a senior officer who understood that routine military operations had suddenly intersected with classified programs that operated outside normal command structures. Sergeant Morrison, you are directed to provide full support for the aircraft using callsign Silent Storm. All records of this encounter are to be classified immediately and reported only through secure channels. No information regarding this incident is to be shared with unauthorized personnel, including civilian air traffic control agencies. Morrison's acknowledgement was crisp and professional, but his mind raced with questions about the civilian pilot whose authentication codes had triggered alerts throughout the military intelligence community. The verification process had confirmed that Elena's callsign and authentication codes were legitimate, But the classification levels protecting her current status meant that he would never learn the full story of who she was or what missions she had conducted during her military service. Elena's Cessna continued its steady flight path toward Whidbey Island Airport, but the 4 F-35s had repositioned themselves into a formation that provided escort protection rather than intercept containment. The fighter's pilots were now operating under different rules of engagement. Their mission changed from identifying a potential threat to protecting a classified asset whose presence in civilian airspace was part of ongoing operations that required security protection from unauthorized exposure. The morning sun reflected off the F-35s' advanced surfaces as they maintained their protective formation around Elena's small aircraft, their pilots demonstrating the professional skill that marked elite military aviation. Major Chun's flight had transitioned from a routine training exercise to a classified escort mission that would require detailed debriefing and official reports that would be filed in secure databases accessible only to personnel with appropriate clearances. Elena's radio crackled with transmissions from Whidbey Island Airport's control tower, where civilian controllers were attempting to coordinate her approach and landing, while remaining unaware of the military aircraft that were providing escort support. The civilian controllers could see the F-35s on their radar displays, but the fighters' transponders were broadcasting codes that identified them as military aircraft conducting authorized operations in the area. Park's communication equipment showed incoming transmissions from multiple military commands as Elena's escort mission proceeded according to protocols that had been established for protecting classified personnel who were operating under civilian cover. The secure communication systems that connected various military installations were coordinating to ensure that appropriate security measures were in place for Elena's arrival at the civilian airport. Elena's GPS showed her position relative to Whidbey Island Airport, where she would complete her landing under the protection of 4 F-35 Lightning jets whose presence would be explained to civilian authorities as routine military training operations. The cover story would protect her true identity while allowing her to complete her civilian mission without compromising the security protocols that governed her current status. The verification process for Elena's authentication codes had reached the highest levels of military and intelligence community command structures, where decisions about classified operations were made by personnel whose names appeared in no public records. Her callsign Silent Storm had been confirmed through multiple secure databases that contained information about operations and personnel that remained classified years after their completion. Major Chun's voice carried professional respect as she received updated mission parameters through secure communication channels. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle Lead. We are receiving final confirmation of your operational status. Command is directing us to provide escort support through landing and to maintain security protocols for your ground operations. Please advise any special requirements for your arrival procedures. Elena's response reflected the careful balance between operational security and practical necessity that marked classified operations in civilian environments. Iron Eagle Lead, Silent Storm. I require standard civilian approach and landing procedures with no deviation from normal traffic patterns. Your flight is to maintain minimum radar signature and avoid any actions that might attract civilian attention to my aircraft or operations. The F-35's advanced stealth capabilities allowed them to reduce their radar signatures to levels that would make them difficult to detect by civilian air traffic control systems, effectively making Elena's escort invisible to unauthorized observation. The fighter's pilots were trained to operate in contested airspace where detection by hostile radar systems could compromise mission success and personnel safety. Elena's Cessna began its descent toward Whidbey Island Airport according to the approach profile she had calculated during her pre-flight planning. But the presence of 4 F-35 escorts transformed her routine civilian landing into a classified military operation that would require coordination between multiple security agencies. The morning flight that had begun as a charity mission to transport rescue puppies had evolved into something that would generate classified reports in intelligence databases. The civilian air traffic controllers at Whidbey Island Airport were processing Elena's approach request while remaining unaware of the true nature of her mission or the military aircraft that were providing escort support. Their professional competence would ensure safe separation between her Cessna and other civilian traffic, but they would never know that they were handling the arrival of a classified asset whose identity was protected by security protocols that extended to the highest levels of government. Morrison's secure telephone conversation had escalated to command levels that would coordinate Elena's ground operations while maintaining the security protocols that protected classified personnel from unauthorized exposure. The base commander's office was receiving real-time updates from intelligence agencies that confirmed Elena's current operational status and the security measures that would be required for her activities at the civilian airport. Elena's mind focused on the practical aspects of completing her landing while maintaining the security protocols that governed her civilian cover. The authentication codes she had transmitted would be verified and filed in secure databases, but her current mission required that she continue operating as a civilian pilot whose activities attracted no attention from unauthorized personnel. The 4 F-35s maintained their escort formation as Elena's Cessna approached the airport traffic pattern, their pilots demonstrating the discipline and skill that marked elite military aviation. The fighter's presence would be explained to civilian authorities as routine training operations, protecting Elena's cover while ensuring that appropriate security measures were in place for her. Ground operations. Elena's radio crackled with routine transmissions from the airport control tower as she requested clearance for landing, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of an experienced pilot completing a routine flight. The civilian controllers had no reason to suspect that they were handling the arrival of a classified asset whose military service had earned her authentication codes that carried immediate authority throughout the military intelligence community. Morning sky around Whidbey Island had become the scene of a complex military operation that would be recorded in classified databases but would appear in no public records. Elena's callsign Silent Storm represented years of service and sacrifice that had earned her the right to operate undercover protocols that protected her identity while allowing her to continue serving national security objectives in civilian capacity. The transformation in the Whidbey Island control tower was immediate and profound as Colonel James Hartford's voice crackled through the secure communication system with orders that left no room for interpretation. Senior Master Sergeant Jake Morrison stood at rigid attention despite being alone in the tower, his years of military training responding automatically to the authority in his commanding officer's tone. The colonel's words carried the weight of classified operations that extended far beyond routine air traffic control procedures. Sergeant Morrison, you are hereby directed to provide Silent Storm with full priority handling and any support requested. All personnel involved in this incident are to be debriefed immediately regarding classification requirements and operational security protocols. This encounter is classified secret and compartmentalized under Special Access Program restrictions. No discussion of these events is authorized outside secure channels. Morrison's response was crisp and professional, but his mind reeled with the implications of what he had just witnessed. In 28 years of military service, he had never encountered a situation where a civilian pilot possessed authentication codes that triggered immediate alerts throughout the military intelligence community. The verification process had confirmed that Elena's callsign Silent Storm was legitimate, but the security classifications protecting her identity meant that he would never learn the full scope of her military service or current operational status. technical sergeant. Lisa Park's radio equipment displayed incoming transmissions from multiple military commands as the security protocols surrounding Elena's mission were implemented with the systematic thoroughness that marked classified operations. Her screens showed coordination between various agencies and commands, their communications encrypted and routed through secure channels that protected sensitive information from unauthorized access. The routine morning of air traffic control had transformed into something approaching a classified military operation. Major Sarah Chun's voice returned to the radio frequency with a tone that reflected her evolving understanding of the situation. The fighter pilot's earlier confidence had been replaced by professional respect, mixed with curiosity about the civilian pilot whose authentication codes had fundamentally changed the nature of their encounter. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle lead. We are receiving final mission parameters from command. Our flight is directed to provide discreet escort support through your landing phase and to maintain security protocols for your ground operations. Elena's response carried the quiet authority of someone who had learned to command respect through years of classified operations where mistakes could have fatal consequences. Iron Eagle lead, Silent Storm, acknowledged. Maintain formation at maximum distance consistent with escort responsibilities. Do not acknowledge my presence on civilian frequencies. This operation requires complete deniability regarding military involvement in civilian aviation activities. The phrase complete deniability sent additional ripples through the military communication network, indicating that Elena's mission was protected by security measures that required official ignorance of military involvement in her activities. Such protocols were reserved for operations that could compromise national security if exposed to unauthorized personnel, including civilian authorities who lacked appropriate security clearances. Elena's Cessna continued its approach to Whidbey Island Airport while surrounded by 4 F-35 Lightning jets whose advanced stealth capabilities made them nearly invisible to civilian radar systems. The fighters maintained their escort formation at distances that provided security protection while avoiding detection by unauthorized observers who might question the presence of military aircraft around a civilian pilot's routine flight operations. Civilian air traffic controllers at Whidbey Island Airport processed Elena's approach request with professional competence while remaining unaware of the classified nature of her mission or the military escort that was providing security protection. Their radar screens showed Elena's Cessna as a routine civilian aircraft requesting landing clearance, with no indication that she was operating under cover protocols that protected her true identity from unauthorized exposure. Morrison's secure telephone conversation had connected him directly to intelligence agencies that maintained oversight of classified operations involving personnel who operated under civilian cover. The verification process for Elena's authentication codes had confirmed her legitimacy through multiple secure databases that contained information about operations and personnel that remained classified years after their completion. Elena's mind focused on the practical aspects of completing her landing while maintaining the security protocols that governed her civilian cover. The morning flight that had begun as a charity mission to transport rescue puppies had evolved into a classified military operation that would generate reports in secure databases, accessible only to personnel with appropriate clearances and operational need. No doubt the 4 F-35s began repositioning themselves to provide security coverage for Elena's landing approach while maintaining their stealth characteristics to avoid detection by civilian observation. Major Chun's flight was operating under rules of engagement that had been modified to protect a classified asset, whose presence in civilian airspace was part of ongoing operations that required security protection from unauthorized exposure. Parks. Communication equipment crackled with encrypted transmissions as various military commands coordinated Elena's ground operations while maintaining the security protocols that protected classified personnel from unauthorized exposure. The secure communication systems that connected military installations worldwide were ensuring that appropriate security measures would be in place for Elena's activities at the civilian airport. Elena's radio crackled with routine transmissions from the airport control tower as she requested clearance for landing, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of an experienced pilot completing a routine flight. The civilian controllers had no reason to suspect that they were handling the arrival of a classified asset whose military service had earned her authentication codes that carried immediate authority throughout the military intelligence community. The morning sun climbed higher as Elena's Cessna descended through the traffic pattern at Whidbey Island Airport, but the routine appearance of her approach concealed the complex military operation that was coordinating her landing while protecting her cover identity. The F-35s maintained their escort positions at distances that provided security protection while remaining invisible to civilian observation and detection systems. Morrison's hands moved across his control panel with practiced efficiency as he coordinated with civilian air traffic control facilities to ensure that Elena's landing proceeded without interference from unauthorized personnel. The classification requirements surrounding her mission meant that all records of the encounter would be filed in secure databases that existed in facilities whose locations were themselves classified. Elena's GPS showed her position relative to the airport runway as she configured her Cessna for landing, according to the approach profile she had calculated during her pre-flight planning. The routine nature of her aircraft's performance concealed the extraordinary circumstances that had led to her being escorted by 4 of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft during what appeared to be a simple civilian flight. The verification process for Elena's authentication codes had reached completion through secure channels that connected military installations and intelligence agencies worldwide. Her callsign Silent Storm had been confirmed through multiple databases that contained information about operations and personnel that remained classified under compartmentalized access protocols that restricted information to personnel with specific clearances and operational need --to-know. Major Chun's voice carried professional respect as she received final mission parameters through secure communication channels that connected her F-35 with command structures that made decisions about classified operations. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle lead. We are receiving confirmation of security protocols for your ground operations. Our flight is directed to maintain overwatch coverage until you have completed your mission requirements. Elena's response reflected the careful balance between operational security and practical necessity that marked classified operations in civilian environments. Iron Eagle lead, Silent Storm, acknowledged. Maintain discreet overwatch and respond only to direct security threats. This operation requires complete separation between military and civilian activities for deniability purposes. The F-35s advanced avionics systems allowed them to monitor Elena's position and the surrounding airspace while maintaining their stealth, characteristics that made them nearly invisible to civilian detection systems. The fighter's pilots were trained to operate in contested environments where detection by hostile forces could compromise mission success and personnel safety. Elena's Cessna touched down on Whidbey Island Airport's runway with the smooth precision that marked thousands of hours of flying experience, but the routine appearance of her landing concealed the classified military operation that had coordinated her arrival while protecting her cover identity. The morning flight that had begun as a charity mission had evolved into something that would generate classified reports in intelligence databases that existed in facilities whose locations were themselves classified. The civilian ground controllers at Whidbey Island Airport directed Elena to a parking area where she would complete her post-flight procedures while remaining unaware of the military aircraft that were providing security overwatch from positions that kept them invisible to Unauthorized observation. The professional competence of the civilian airport personnel would ensure that Elena's activities appeared routine to any observers who lacked appropriate security clearances. Morrison's secure telephone conversation had escalated to command levels that would coordinate Elena's ground operations while maintaining the security protocols that protected classified personnel from unauthorized exposure. The base commander's office was receiving real-time updates from intelligence agencies that confirmed Elena's current operational status and the security measures that would be required for her continued activities under civilian cover. Elena's mind shifted to the practical requirements of completing her post-flight procedures while maintaining the security protocols that governed her civilian cover. The authentication codes she had transmitted would be verified and filed in secure databases, but her current mission required that she continue operating as a civilian pilot, whose activities attracted no attention from unauthorized personnel or agencies. Elena's Cessna rolled to a stop on the tarmac at Whidbey Island Airport, its engine winding down with the familiar mechanical sounds that marked the end of a routine flight. To any casual observer, she appeared to be just another civilian pilot completing a standard cross-country trip, shutting down systems and preparing for the post-flight inspection that was part of responsible aircraft ownership. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as she methodically worked through her shutdown checklist, but the apparent normalcy of her actions concealed the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her to this moment. The 3 golden retriever puppies in their travel crates behind her had weathered the flight remarkably well, their resilience and adaptability serving them better than most humans would have managed under similar circumstances. Elena smiled at their soft whimpering as they sensed the aircraft had stopped moving, their eagerness to explore new surroundings reminding her of the simple mission that had begun this complex morning. The charity flight to deliver rescue animals to their new homes seemed like a lifetime ago, though barely 2 hours had passed since she'd taken off from Seattle. Through her cockpit window, Elena could see the routine activities of a busy civilian airport continuing around her aircraft. Fuel trucks moved between parked planes, maintenance crews worked on scheduled inspections, and other pilots prepared for their own flights with the focused attention that marked serious aviation. None of them showed any awareness that 4 F-35 Lightning jets were maintaining security overwatch from positions that kept them invisible to unauthorized observation, their advanced stealth capabilities making them ghosts in the morning sky. Elena's hands moved through the familiar routine of post-flight procedures, checking fuel quantities, oil levels, and engine parameters, while her mind processed the implications of what had just occurred. The authentication codes she had transmitted would trigger detailed reports in classified databases that existed in facilities whose locations were themselves classified. Her civilian cover had been maintained, but the encounter with military interceptors had created a paper trail that would be scrutinized by intelligence agencies whose oversight extended to every aspect of her current activities. The civilian ground controllers at Whidbey Island Airport had directed her to a parking area that appeared randomly selected, but had actually been chosen to provide maximum security coverage from the military aircraft that were maintaining overwatch positions. Elena understood that nothing about her current situation was truly random, that every aspect of her ground operations was being coordinated by personnel whose names appeared in no public records and whose decisions were based on security considerations that extended far beyond immediate aviation safety. Elena's radio crackled with routine communications from the airport control tower as other aircraft requested taxi clearance and landing instructions. The professional competence of the civilian controllers was evident in their smooth coordination of multiple aircraft operations, but they remained unaware that they were providing services to a classified asset whose identity was protected by security protocols that reached the highest levels of government. The morning air carried the distinctive smells of aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid that mark active airports worldwide. Familiar odors that had accompanied Elena through thousands of hours of flying in various aircraft under conditions ranging from routine to life-threatening. Her civilian life had provided a peaceful refuge from the intense operational tempo that had characterized her military service. But the morning's events had demonstrated that her past remained connected to her present in ways that required constant vigilance and careful attention to security protocols. Elena's post-flight inspection revealed no mechanical problems with her Cessna, the reliable aircraft having performed flawlessly throughout the morning's extraordinary circumstances. The simple instruments and mechanical systems that had seemed almost primitive compared to the advanced avionics she had operated during her military service had proven themselves adequate for the complex situation that had developed without warning. Sometimes the most sophisticated technology was the kind that worked perfectly without calling attention to itself. The puppies behind her had grown restless in their travel crates, their natural curiosity about their new surroundings competing with the security requirements that limited Elena's movements on the ground. The civilian airport provided adequate facilities for animal care during extended stopovers, but Elena's current status required that she minimize contact with unauthorized personnel who might ask questions about her flight or destination. Elena's mind shifted to the practical requirements of completing her civilian mission, while maintaining the security protocols that governed her current activities. The rescue puppies needed to be delivered to their new homes, but the classified nature of her encounter with military aircraft had created complications that required careful coordination between her civilian responsibilities and the security measures that protected her true identity. Through her headset, Elena could hear fragments of radio communications between various aircraft and the control tower, their routine requests for services and clearances, creating the familiar background noise of active aviation operations. The professional competence of the civilian pilots and controllers was evident in their smooth coordination of complex flight operations, but none of them were aware that they were sharing airspace with classified military aircraft that remained invisible to unauthorized observation. Elena's GPS showed her position relative to the civilian airport facilities where she would complete her post-flight requirements while maintaining the security protocols that protected her cover identity. The morning flight that had begun as been buken. A charity mission had evolved into a classified military operation that would generate reports and secure databases accessible only to personnel with appropriate clearances and operational need to know. The 4 F-35s continued their security overwatch from positions that kept them invisible to civilian radar systems while providing comprehensive coverage of Elena's ground operations. Major Chun's flight was operating under rules of engagement that had been modified to protect a classified asset whose presence in civilian airspace was part of ongoing operations that required security protection from unauthorized exposure. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from the rescue organization coordinator, asking for an update on her progress and estimated arrival time at the final destination. The routine nature of the communication reminded her that her civilian life included responsibilities and relationships that required careful protection from the security considerations that governed her current status. Maintaining her cover identity required that she continue operating as a civilian pilot whose activities attracted no attention from unauthorized personnel. The morning sun climbed higher as Elena completed her post-flight procedures and prepared to continue her civilian mission. But the routine appearance of her activities concealed the complex military operation that was coordinating her security protection while maintaining her cover identity. The professional competence of the civilian airport personnel ensured that her activities appeared normal to any observers who lacked appropriate security clearances. Elena's hands moved through the familiar routine of preparing her aircraft for the next phase of flight. checking fuel quantities and engine parameters while her mind processed the implications of the morning's events. The authentication codes she had transmitted would be verified and filed in secure databases, but her current mission required that she continue operating as a civilian pilot, whose activities attracted no attention from unauthorized personnel or agencies. The civilian ground controllers at Whidbey Island Airport continued their routine operations while remaining unaware of the classified nature of Elena's mission or the military aircraft that were providing security overwatch from positions that kept them invisible to unauthorized observation. Their professional competence would ensure that Elena's departure proceeded smoothly while maintaining the security protocols that protected her true identity. Elena's radio crackled with routine transmissions from the airport control tower as she prepared to request taxi clearance for departure, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of an experienced pilot completing a routine flight. The civilian controllers had no reason to suspect that they were handling the departure of a classified asset whose military service had earned her authentication codes that carried immediate authority throughout the military intelligence community. The morning air remained calm and stable as Elena prepared to continue her civilian mission, but the routine nature of her preparations concealed the extraordinary circumstances that had transformed a charity flight into a classified military operation. The 4 F-35s maintained their security overwatch positions while remaining invisible to civilian observation and detection systems. Elena's mind focused on the practical aspects of completing her civilian mission while maintaining the security protocols that governed her current activities. The rescue puppies needed to be delivered to their new homes, but the classified nature of her encounter with military aircraft had created a permanent record in intelligence databases that would follow her throughout her civilian life. The morning's events had demonstrated that her past remained connected to her present in ways that required constant vigilance and careful attention to operational security. The authentication codes she had transmitted would generate detailed reports in secure databases that existed in facilities whose locations were themselves classified. Her civilian cover had been maintained, but the encounter with military interceptors had created a paper trail that would be scrutinized by intelligence agencies, whose oversight extended to every aspect of her current activities under civilian status. Elena's Cessna sat quietly on the tarmac at Whidbey Island Airport, its simple appearance concealing the complex military operation that had coordinated her arrival while protecting her cover identity. The morning flight that had begun as a charity mission to transport rescue puppies had evolved into something that would generate classified reports in intelligence databases that existed in facilities whose locations were themselves classified information. Elena taxied her Cessna toward the runway threshold, the 3 golden retriever puppies stirring in their crates as they sensed another departure approaching. Through her headset, she could hear the routine chatter of civilian air traffic control. But she also knew that 4 F-35 Lightning jets were repositioning themselves to provide discreet escort coverage for the remainder of her flight. The morning sun had burned off the last of the coastal fog, revealing the full beauty of the Pacific Northwest landscape that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Whidbey Tower, November 7-4-2 Papa Alpha, requesting departure clearance. Elena transmitted, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism that had marked her civilian flying for the past 3 years. To the controllers, she remained just another weekend pilot continuing a routine cross-country flight. They had no way of knowing that the authentication codes she had transmitted an hour earlier were still generating classified reports in secure databases throughout the military intelligence community. As her Cessna lifted off from the runway and climbed toward the morning sky, Elena caught a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off distant, metallic surfaces, the F-35s, maintaining their protective overwatch while remaining invisible to unauthorized observation. The puppies settled into their travel crates with the trusting acceptance of creatures who understood that their human companion could be relied upon to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Elena's radio crackled one final time with Major Chun's voice, transmitted on a secure frequency that wouldn't be monitored by civilian systems. Silent Storm, Iron Eagle lead, safe travels. Honor to have flown with you. Likewise, Iron Eagle, until we meet again. The authentication codes would remain classified. The reports would be filed in secure databases, and Elena would continue her civilian life protecting secrets that had shaped history. But for those who knew the significance of callsign, Silent Storm, respect had been earned and would never be forgotten. Have you ever wondered about the quiet heroes who walk among us, their extraordinary service hidden behind ordinary appearances? What would you do if you discovered that someone you'd overlooked had sacrificed everything for your freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and they inspire the stories we tell. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and share this with someone who needs to remember that true courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Another story of hidden valor is waiting for you right now. Click that next video, and we'll see you there same time tomorrow here on Dignity Defended.